This week on MS Refresh, Microsoft MVP Derek Cash-Peterson joins us to talk about the Microsoft 365 Learning Pathways project and how it can help you in your organization. Subscribe to stay in the know. This is the MS Refresh Show. Hi there, and welcome to the Matt and Sean 365 Refresh Show. This is episode 6-3 for the work week of June 20th, 2022, coming to you from the East Coast, although in a different space with terrible audio, and I apologize for that, but still definitely on the East Coast. My name is Matt Wade.
And as always from the West Coast, I'm Sean Bugler. Matt, you saying for the week of whatever it was, the echo, the reverb of it was so unintentionally perfect.
Excellent. All right. This is my new sound mixing studio here to do just live.
If we could just get it's the very like live from New York kind of.
We need the movie trailer bottom sound going on. So just the tension just builds as we kind of work our way through it. Matt, for today's session, I was going to point out that we are on the week 3 of this month, and we're going to be hitting a guest interview. Next week, Sean will be taking the reins to discuss his Muse, if you will, power platform and the showcasing of what's good in that area. And but yeah, today we're going to dive right into it. So Sean, you want to hit up our next step?
100%. As Matt mentioned, we've got a really special guest this week. He has over 20 years of industry experience building customized intranets, extranets, and public-facing websites based on the Microsoft stack. He specializes in front-end development and visual design and branding of SharePoint and Office 365. He's a Microsoft Office Development MVP, Principal Architect at Simpraxis Consulting, Community Liaison, and Technical Maintainer. And this is why he's here for the Learning Pathways project. Please welcome to the show, Derek Cash-Peterson. Derek, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. That's a long intro.
We were very liberal with what we cut out of here because you're a very accomplished person. You bring a lot to the table.
It was a very long bio. We spent a lot of time editing that.
I have been working with SharePoint so long. I have gray hairs and everything, and that's not just from my kids.
I mean, in fairness, anybody who's worked with SharePoint for more than 20 minutes starts to get gray hairs. I mean,
exactly. Yeah.
Although, in fairness, the modern experience has really smoothed out a lot of those bumps.
It has.
At least on the front. That doesn't bring your gray hair back to the original color.
It doesn't. Nope.
So you can tell the threshold of like 2013 back. Anybody who worked with 2013 back, that's where the gray is kind of. Those are the like tree rings.
Right up here, you know.
Tree rings.
Derek, we're really excited to have you here. We've been planning this for this episode for a couple of months now here, and it was tough getting the timing down because, of course, you are not in on our side of the world. We like to think about things in a very mono-focused way. Where are you? Where are you joining us from?
So I am joining from Reykjavik, Iceland. I guess at this point, I'm officially an expat. Nice. We came here for a 1-year experiment, and we just had our visas renewed, so we're here for a couple more years at least. But yeah, my family and I moved from the Boston area to Iceland last year.
How's the experience been for you? Because you're still working, obviously full time. What has that experience been like for you making the transition over? I mean, are work hours the same? Is this very asynchronous?
So because I'm in Iceland, most of my clients are East Coast in the US. So there's a fair amount of crossover. There's only a 4 or 5 hour difference. So for the most part, I work an Icelandic day. So I work 9 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon-ish. I have quiet focus time, which in the mornings before anybody on the East Coast wakes up, which I really, really appreciate.
Oh, I'm so jealous.
And then exactly. And then my afternoons are generally like my early afternoons through early evenings are generally filled with, calls and meetings and stuff like that. But, there's a fair amount of, I chose to move halfway around the world. So like there's a fair amount of leeway in my day. So I try to maintain good work-life balance, but sometimes if I need to meet with somebody on the West Coast, I'm meeting with them at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, my time, or, if I'm working with Japan, I may get up a little earlier and, work with them. Although it's closer here for Japan than it was in Boston.
I was just about to say, you're kind of in the sweet spot of being able to stay up a little bit later or get up a little bit earlier. And it's not extreme on either sides for a good chunk of the world.
It really is. The only time when it really gets challenging is the West Coast, because there's either 8 or 9 or 7 and 8 hour difference. It's challenging. Because by 8 or 9 o'clock at night at my time, like I'm ready to go to bed.
Yeah, I hear that. I was going to say Icelandic day, at least at this point of the year, I would think that's like 3 a.m. to midnight or something, isn't it?
We are in the tail end. Like at this point, the sun is almost up 24 hours. So we've got another week. In another week on midsummer, the sun won't actually go down below the horizon.
That's incredible.
That's so cool.
Even at 3 or 4 in the morning. Even at 3 or 4 in the morning, you sit out and you're like, you could read the newspaper in your living room with no lights on.
That's fascinating. I gotta come out to Iceland.
I agree with that, definitely.
It's really great in the summer because you get all these extra hours of daylight. So if you want to go on a tour, you want to go drive somewhere, you've got like extra hours. I know my family and I, one day we ended up essentially driving the distance from Boston to Montreal and back in one day. And, it took us 14 hours, but we sort of went, and did our thing. And then we came back and we were like, oh, we would never have driven to Montreal for lunch and come home. But anyway.
But here we are.
But here we are.
Yes, exactly. Well, when you're in a different place and you've got different contexts, you have different standards.
Yeah.
So we brought you on today because we wanted to, you do. When I travel, it's like, oh yeah, I'm in Germany. I can go to Switzerland today. And it's like, oh, that's like going from where I am to Jersey or something. I wouldn't do that in just a random day.
Exactly.
The distances don't mean as much. But we had you on today because we wanted to talk about the Microsoft 365 Learning Pathways site template project, whatever descriptor you want to give for that. Because it's a really, really cool resource that's out there. It's part of the SharePoint lookbook, which I am an avid fan of the lookbook, but it's kind of a separate thing. It's, I think, included with the lookbook as sort of an entry point, but really it's meant to give people access to sort of existing training resources so that the people like me who are an admin locally don't have to go out and write a whole bunch of content on stuff that's just going to change on me anyway, right? So I wanted to see if you can give a quick overview of what that is, what the goals are, and why do you do it?
Yeah. Well, Learning Pathways in and of itself is really a micro learning tool. It allows you to add to your tenant very quickly Microsoft provided content, as well as create your own custom content. And it's really targeted for content across all of the M365 suite. So, you can get information on lists, you can get information on SharePoint, you can get information on pivot tables, and you can also then use it to create your own content. I think the really cool thing about it is that it's super accessible, right? You mentioned the lookbook, and we do use the lookbook as our primary provisioning engine, but it can actually be provisioned separately. Like your admin can go and upload the website, the web part, and then create a site for it, on their own. It's just the lookbook looks pretty, and it really provisions some nice looking a learning portal for your folks to go into and start learning right away.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So building on that, you talked about this idea of being able to bring it into an existing tenant.
Yep.
Do you see that as the primary value proposition of the Learning Pathways, is that it's in my home kind of thing, or where do you see the primary value prop of the Learning Pathways today?
So it used to be, back in the old days, back in my day, you could go in and you would have to contact a training company and license their content, their proprietary content on how to use Office, right? And with the 3-year release cycle on-prem, that kind of worked, right? Because you really pay for it. It didn't change that much. And then you got new content when it came through. In Microsoft 365, everything is changing so fast that there's really not a good and easy way to keep track of all the documentation. Microsoft keeps up that documentation on docs.microsoft.com and on support.office.com. And Learning Pathways pulls all of that together in one centralized spot in your tenant. So you own how it's configured, you own what content you're showing, you own what content you're not showing. And so you really get this level of customization and flexibility that you can have to say, oh, well, we're not using SharePoint, or we're not using Teams yet. And you can hide that content. So it's really easy for you to really customize it down to your tenant and your specific organization.
The absolute irony if they're not using SharePoint.
Well, yeah.
I figured Yammer was the right example. But...
Bad choice. Yammer. I don't want to hate on the Yammer.
No,
I don't want to hate on Yammer.
Definitely not.
But realistically,
especially after
a lot of
coming
people
off
don't
of
use
the year of Yammer.
Yes, exactly.
Was it year of Yammer 2014 when InfoPath died?
I think it was.
Sorry.
I think it was into the start of the pandemic, and they got an extra year out of the deal because just everybody went on pause.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to keep my mouth shut now. All right. Bye.
So I kind of want to talk about what it looks like, right? So I'm a very visual person, and this is a learning resource. So you had sent over a couple screenshots here. I'm going to bring this one up, which is the main screen. And it's not the cleanest display here. We're in the background, but talk us through like what are we looking at here?
So the first thing is when you use the lookbook, you get an entire site collection provision for you. And you get all the admin materials as well as some of the sort of core training pages. And this is the Microsoft 365 training page. So what you see here is just the learning, this is a traditional SharePoint page, but then you've got the different categories, getting started, scenarios. There's actually another product section down below. And then each one of these things, first days, modern workplace, work remote, these are all subcategories that you can then add your individual playlists. So this particular page is one of the training pages that lets you explore all the different components and all the different assets that you have in the tool. When you click into one of these, actually, if you want to send over the second screenshot that I sent, this is the category. So this is the SharePoint subcategory, and there are all these playlists. So there's 4 playlists, and each one of these playlists then contains an asset. And so you can explore and you can say, oh, I want to learn, I need to do a quick start on SharePoint. I've never used it before, I need to figure it out. Or you can learn how to share and sync if you specifically need to talk about syncing or learn about syncing. And the same thing holds true if you're working with Excel. How do you manipulate data in Excel? How do you do pivot tables? How do you do list formatting? All of that, or not list formatting, how do you work with lists? Those are the kinds of things that you can put in there. This is all the out-of-the-box content that Microsoft is providing, but you also have the ability to add your own customizations in there as well. So you can create your own categories, your own playlists, and your own assets. And so if you want to click, yep, this is actually the playlist itself, looking at the quick start for SharePoint. And you get to read the content right here in line. A little drop down in the center lets you pick from page to page, from asset to asset. Or if you want to go sequentially, you can use the forward and next buttons to sort of help you loop through the content in a very curated manner.
Now, I want to jump in because you said something really, really interesting there, which was that you have the ability to customize that, which of course, I mean, anybody who's looked into the learning pathways, you've seen that you have the ability to opt in and out of specific Microsoft 365 services. But take, for example, my organization. Like, we're not a full Microsoft shop. We leverage Slack, we leverage Zoom. When you say custom assets to be able to imbue your own sort of training components into there, are we talking about the ability to bring in or create content in the Learning Pathways project that represents those services that may not necessarily be very Microsoft centric, or perhaps their internal tools or services?
Yeah, absolutely. You can bring in any, well, okay, there's an asterisk on this. The content in Learning Pathways is iframed in. So that means that it gets pulled into the web part through an iframe, which means that you can have, right now, all the data lives on docs.microsoft.com. So it's pulling that content in. The asterisk is the content needs to be iframe allowable or iframeable. I don't know if that's really a word.
I've always said iframeable.
It is now.
Yeah, it needs to be iframeable and allow itself to be pulled in. So if you had, say, Slack documentation on the Slack website, and you could pull that in. If that was allowed to be iframeable, you can 100% create a custom category and a custom playlist for Slack documentation. What we
How cool is
see,
that?
that is pretty cool. What we see a lot of is custom business applications, or like customized, like what is your business process for submitting or reviewing expense reports? Or you have a procurement app that somebody built as a Power App, and you need to document that for your users because now everybody in the company is using it. You can actually go right in the assets in the administration for Learning Pathways, and you can create new SharePoint pages and type in your content right on the page, and then create documentation for custom applications. And because it's a web part, you can also embed that web part on the page where it lives in your intranet. So it contextualizes all the content right where the users are working.
So you use this as that single source of truth for your training for essentially modern workplace, regardless of it being. Now, I think I do want to say I'm a little bit disappointed that it doesn't automatically seek out and destroy, almost like like a white blood cell to a virus, things that are coming from docs.slack.com or docs.webex.com or things like that. But we'll let it slide.
I just didn't talk about that part.
Yes.
I guess this is an important opportunity to highlight that the Learning Pathways is it's not a Microsoft owned thing, right? Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between the Learning Pathways and Microsoft?
So Microsoft developed Learning Pathways. There's an interdepartmental, intergroup team that works on it, both from an engineering side, from a team side, from a SharePoint side, from a content side. And so I'm the community liaison for that group, sort of the voice of the user, if you will.
Of the people.
Of the people, yes. So I'm sort of out there, and that's my main role in the group. When the web part was originally conceived, Julie Turner and Stefan Bauer worked on that project with the team at Microsoft to come up with the architecture, the visual design, and to build it. But that group still is together to sort of help facilitate content updates, content curation. As far as product enhancements, we take feedback from the community on what they want to see in the product or the tool. I think then I review that with the team, and then we decide what our engineering priorities are going to be for any given quarter or any given year. I operate on a volunteer basis, so just like any of the other P&P open source open source tools out there, we have a GitHub repo, we have an issues list. We do our best to answer questions in a timely fashion, provide GitHub-based support, and stuff like that. So it's while it is Microsoft tended and the content all comes from Microsoft, it is a P&P asset.
So let's say from the brand perspective, and this is me getting into a pet peeve of mine, which is Microsoft Viva. So Viva has like 17 modules, right? And one of those is called Learning.
Yep.
How does this interact with, compete with? How does it coexist with? How does Learning Pathways, the site template and the resource there, interact and coexist with Viva Learning?
So I think it is Learning Pathways is built before Viva. So Learning Pathways was built before Viva. So
I was so upset that I disconnected. That was
Yep. And so it has some of the same functionality as Viva. I think now that Viva Learning is out, there's a considerable amount of overlap, especially how it relates to the Microsoft content. That said, we really want to position Learning Pathways as a custom learning tool, because right now there's not an ability to customize the content or bring in your own custom content into Learning. So that's where Learning Pathways really can shine. And I think moving forward, that's the direction that it's going to end up going in.
I will say also, from government customer perspective, Learning Pathways works in the government tenants.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, it does work in the GCC side of things, which I think is fantastic. I don't know if that was a deliberate effort, but I know that I operated in GCC for a few years, and it was really nice to be able to drop it in there with the lookbook.
That is great. We've been talking back and forth a lot about GCC, and it's great that it works in there. In fact, I was at a conference in Seattle, and there was a huge group of folks from the VA in the U.S. and they were talking with me about learning pathways and getting it installed in their tenant. So it's great to know that it works. And so
now that actually brings up an interesting question, which is that as the community liaison, I can only imagine that you are the front line of getting to hear not just, of course, what people would like to see more out of with respect to the learning pathways, but the success stories. Has there been one that stood out to you as like, wow, like learning pathways has really done something here?
I anecdotally, so we don't get a lot of success stories in the issues list, to be totally fair.
We got to work on that. Everybody who's watching here, if you have learning success stories for the Pathways project, share them. We'd love to
share them on the issues list. I would love to see that. I can say from my own experience implementing this is one of the tools, and I'm not just saying this because I maintain it, but this is one of the 2 solutions that I recommend every one of my clients install. And because it's really versatile and helps folks, sort of manage their content and helps them in so many different ways. I think the biggest success story I have is really using it as sort of a documentation repository. So we have one client that I've worked with, and they don't do the same thing, like they don't do things every single day, right? They're not in SharePoint every single day. So they need to know how to manage news or how to recreate the site that we created for them. What are the bells and whistles that they need to turn on or the settings that they need? So instead, what we did was we created an asset for every little individual thing that we did. And we recorded videos for them, stored them in Stream. And then they use that as a searchable, sort of place for them to go, oh, I got to do news this week. I'm going to go look up the procedure for this. And when you extrapolate that out from this, small little organization, you can also then extrapolate that out to managing standard operating procedures and step-by-step instructions for how to do your employee reviews and all those kinds of things. So those are the success stories that I've seen in my, own work.
Boy, that's a much cheaper way of doing things than going out and buying like ServiceNow or something for, all the SOPs and, resources, KBs, all that kind of stuff. But I'm curious, you mentioned that there are 2 things that you always tell your clients to install. Now, assuming we don't have to pay you your hourly rate for this answer, what's the second one?
The second one's the P&P search web part.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right. Yeah. No,
Yep.
I have to go. I keep hearing about that as of late. I feel like they got an overhaul over the last year or so.
They did. I mean, it was great before, and it's even better now because they've basically tokenized a whole lot of slots. So they may give you like a card view that looks like the card view from some of the out-of-the-box web parts, but lets you swap out individual managed properties to put the data that you want to put in there right in the user interface.
I gotta go. And I gotta go check this out.
Exactly.
I gotta check this out.
Exactly. And so it helps with things like, the other thing is it lets you, and this is like totally off topic of learning pathways, but it has tokens to the user profile. So you can start pulling back user profile data based on custom properties that you may have put into your user profile.
That sounds big brothery. Lots of fun there.
Shut up.
Well, if you want to do anniversary date or birthday, or a lot of folks will pull in that stuff like this month's anniversaries.
Sure.
Okay,
or my organization is I forget what it's called, Coop, but we're an emergency organization. So if there's something that happens like a natural disaster, or otherwise we're a government entity. And so it's really important for us to be able to snap into action and figure out who's responsible for what. And those are custom attributes internally for us. So it would be really great for us to be able to surface those kinds of properties in a much more front-facing kind of way. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So those are the 2, learning pathways and P&P search are the 2 things that every new tenant, I'm like, install them.
Yeah, definitely.
I can also
so
see
let's
the
say-
appeal of consultants using that as like a documentation handoff.
Yeah, definitely. That's super
Yeah.
handy, actually, that you say that. So let's say you don't have learning pathways. What do you do? How do you go forward and install it, get it ready, and what kind of resources do you guys have?
Yep. So the quickest and easiest way that I would suggest that folks install learning pathways is to go to lookbook.microsoft.com. And that's the lookbook. It's all the sort of design resources from Microsoft. And then under the examples tab, there is solutions. And under solutions, you will see Microsoft 365 learning pathways, training, learning, and adoption. And you can type in your URL. You can add it to your tenant right there. You can add it to your tenant. You do need to be a tenant admin. That is the one thing that sort of folks sometimes they don't quite know before they install it. So you need to be a tenant admin because it sets a property in the tenant app the property bag of what's the URL for the site. So you do that, and then within an hour, it's done, and you've got a beautiful site that looks like the one that you just showed in the screenshots, Matt, and then it's up and running.
Now, is the documentation for the learning pathways on the lookbook site, or we'll obviously we'll get it from you and we'll drop it in the show notes as well, but there is documentation for learning pathways on docs.microsoft.com as well, yeah?
Yes, there is documentation on there, and there is also documentation on the in the GitHub repo. So there's installation instructions if you choose to sort of go the manual installation route. You can get all the instructions. There's PowerShell scripts to run for installation. There's, basically to walk you through everything.
So as a non-developer, I've always found it ridiculous and hilarious that the computer science industry and just profession has legitimately named something a property bag. And that is actually a term they use, because I just picture Santa Claus running around with his property bag asking Rudolph to get him to the next place so that he can kick off the next workflow. Anyways,
yeah.
Does Santa look like the Monopoly man, the Monopoly guy in this scenario?
From the chance card. That's true. Well, Sean, I'll kick it back to you for our final words.
Absolutely, Derek. Of course, we appreciate you being here. But we've got a question that we ask every one of our guests because, we bring people on who have things that are immediately tangibly relevant to our viewers. But ultimately, what we want to know from you is what excites you about the Learning Pathways project and what you do. Because, I mean, you said it yourself, you volunteer to do this. And this is not, this is not 2 to 3 hours a week. We know that you invest a ton of time in this here. And of course, the community really appreciates it, especially when they understand how much goes into it. So what excites you about it to the extent that you do invest all this time in it?
I do it because I believe in the tool, and I really believe strongly in the value proposition and what it brings to the community. And what it brings to organizations, right? I don't do anything if it doesn't have a solid value to it. And that's really why I do it. Like, I see people implement it. I see people getting it up. I share ways to make different uses for it. That's what excites me. I'm excited because I'm sort of at a pivotal point where, we've got Viva Learning coming in, and now I'm in the spot where I get to help shape the next direction of the tool and how that works and how that changes and evolves with Viva Learning. So that's why I'm in here, and that's why I'm talking about it. That's why I help maintain it. And that really excites me.
That's a beautiful answer. I love it. Office development, Microsoft Office Development MVP, Principal Architect at Sympraxis, Community Liaison and Technical Maintainer for the Learning Pathways Project. Derek Cash-Peterson, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciated everything you had to share. We'll drop all those resources that you mentioned in the show notes here, and we look forward to having you back.
All right. Well, thanks a lot.
Well, that was fun.
That was very very insightful. There are a couple nuggets that I was looking to get that I got, and a couple more that I didn't know I was going to get, and I got. So I'm looking forward to kind of playing around with some of this stuff as we move forward my organization, my clients and stuff.
I completely forgot to mention that I was a technical trainer before I did what I do now. And I remember when they announced the learning pathways that this was such a boon. And also my CEO of this very small boutique thing was very threatened because his entire business model was exactly what Derek described about, the 3-year cycle of, like Word comes out, Excel comes out, and people like me would go and teach about here's all the best ways to do things. And the learning pathway is essentially automated, or at least, centralized that experience for so many people. And that was when I knew I needed to get into doing more than teaching.
Yeah, definitely. Oh yeah, I mean that I'm not going to say the entire industry of like the in-place training or whatever in M365 and in SharePoint and whatnot is completely under threat. But it just makes it a lot easier for us. We don't have to create that content. We don't have to depend on a resource organization that may fall behind or whatever. Like Microsoft has that incentive to create their content. And the benefit of, I know clients that I work with, they have some pretty specific settings and setups where they do allow certain things and not allow other things. The fact that I can pull, the article on, XYZ that we actually didn't enable because of security reasons or whatever, is just super, super helpful.
Yeah, I think that ultimately the ability to allow individuals to customize their own experience is the biggest value proposition there. And I'm really excited to see what our audience does with it.
Yep, definitely.
So a reminder for our viewers here, next week, we will be talking about the Power Platform. We're going to be talking about Power Pages specifically and all the cool stuff that they're talking about there. Is there a Ken happening back there, Matt?
Sorry, I will mute myself.
So we're going to be talking about the Power Platform. We'll be showcasing all the interesting things that have happened since build. So there's a ton of really cool stuff that we're going to be talking about here. Our thanks, of course, to Derek Cash-Peterson for joining us here. Thank all of you for joining us for this episode here. We will be back next week. As always, a like and a subscribe is sincerely appreciated. You can always leave a comment in the show notes below, or I'm sorry, in the comments below. We'd really appreciate that. Matt, thanks for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time.